everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Across the Cloud series, where we open the floor to EU Cloud CoC members to share a bit about their experience in joining the code's ecosystem and going through its adherence process. And in this spirit, today I'm very happy to have a chat with Mark Crosbie, Data Protection Officer at Dropbox. Welcome, Mark. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Actually, thank you for welcoming me over here in Dublin. Really looking forward to hearing your insights on the code, its current state of play, and potential future developments. So without further ado, I will segue to my first question. Why did Dropbox decide to join this particular code, and what kind of challenges this tool can address when it comes to GDPR implementation?
Well, thanks for having me on the series. I've actually been watching them all, so it's actually lovely to be able to take part at last in them. And for us, when we were building our privacy program, like a lot of people back in 2018, as we were getting ready for GDPR, we were constructing it in some ways, hoping that we were building the right thing. But over time, you want to actually measure the effectiveness of your privacy program. How do we know our program is good enough? How can we communicate that to our board, our executives, and also most importantly, our customers and our users? Because if you're a customer of a cloud service, such as Dropbox, how can you be sure that when we say, oh yes, we comply with all of GDPR, that we actually meet those obligations? And that's where an external standard like the Code of Conduct comes into play, and where we find it really valuable to take this outside-in look at the program we've built and use that to actually potentially drive improvement, but more importantly, to be able to communicate it to our customers and to our board of directors as well.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, looking at your strong commitment to demonstrate your GDPR compliance efforts, for those who aren't familiar, actually, Dropbox is not only a member of the EU Cloud CoC for a significant period of time now, but also has gone through successfully the adherence process twice. So taking all of this into consideration, could you perhaps dig in on the added value not only to Dropbox, but particularly to your customers on adhering to the code, and also perhaps talk a little bit about the adherence journey, what it took for you guys to get there?
Sure. So when we think of privacy at Dropbox, we think of it in the context of our trust program, because our trust program is the overarching program that includes privacy and security and integrity. And so for us, this is the way we actually go about running and measuring risks and managing those risks. But then how do we actually have a communication about that with customers and the board? We have our users out in the world becoming more aware than ever of their privacy rights. I think now more than ever, people are asking tough questions about what's happening to my data, how is it being processed? And at the same time, privacy is a board director level issue now, whereas previously it was seen as a very technical or esoteric subject. It is now top of mind for the board. And so you need to have a way to have a conversation with your users about how their data is being processed and assure them that you're treating it appropriately. But you also need a structured way to communicate with the board of directors and do that so that we can have conversations about privacy that don't get bogged down in the details, but at the same time allow them to ask all the right questions that they have to ask to do their job. And so when we go through the exercise like developing a code of conduct and working our way systematically through the control questions, that forces us to do some of the tough thinking and be able to explain things in a much better way, more clearly potentially, and also have a better handle on where we need to think about risk. This makes it easier for us to communicate to our users because we're able to go, look, we're able to go through this external standard. It's a very rigorous standard, and we've done it, as you said, now 2 years running. But likewise, when we talk to our board, we're able to put the context of what we discussed with them into a global external standard like the Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Mark. And this is extremely insightful to exactly shed light on how privacy is not a segmented topic that is only explored by a small team, but now that really requires exchange with the broader set of professionals, the involvement of a lot of different expertise to really reach appropriate levels of compliance and transparency, accountability, and so forth. So now, perhaps looking more specifically to the role, the crucial role of data protection officers, given your extensive experience in this regard. Could you perhaps shed light on the biggest challenges you have faced since GDPR came into force, and how do you believe effective compliance tools such as the EU Cloud CoC can be helpful for professionals in your position?
So 5 years ago, the role of a DPO was sort of brought into existence by the GDPR. And a lot of us were kind of flying blind. We were figuring out what we needed to do as we were going along. But now 5 years later, I think a lot of us, myself included, have a much better handle on what our role is about providing oversight of data processing decisions and how data is used at the company, but also providing advice to the board, to the executive management about how they shouldn't be making decisions around data processing. And at the same time, acting as that point of contact to the regulators. You're doing all of this in the face of a constant need to have a company innovate and drive business. So a DPO is trying to straddle those lines between balancing innovation and not being a complete blocker on that, while at the same time discharging their duties, which are statutory duties to actually oversee data processing and ensure the company complies with GDPR. And this is a tough line to straddle, because you're constantly having to make judgment calls. And so any tool that you have as a DPO that can kind of help you think through where you need to be focused, where the areas are of concern, is always going to make your life easier. And I always welcome something like that. So whenever I want to think about assessing or overseeing privacy, I'm going to look at more structured ways to do it, because then I can know they're repeatable. If I'm in conversations with a regulator, I can use them as tools to kind of form that conversation. But they can also guide and shape my work plan for the year, so I can work with my peers across the company. The Code of Conduct was a good example of how we were able to do that as part of our broader trust program, where we have other compliance initiatives as well, our SOC 2 and other ISO audits that we undertake. These all guide us into understanding where the risks are in our business and what we need to do to address them.
We have been discussing now the EU Cloud CoC, which is a compliance tool for GDPR, Article 28, more specifically for the entire cloud environment. And this has been a quite unique experience, and we have built a significant know-how when it comes to co-regulatory tools and the privacy field. And looking at that, we constantly get questions in the sense of how can we leverage this experience to other topics, other regulatory developments, and so forth. So I wanted to hear from you. Do you believe there is a demand for such a tools in other contexts? Let's say AI, the usual suspect at the moment. So what do you think there?
Well, we have to have a conversation about AI at some point in every conversation about privacy. So I think one of the things that we started with when we looked at AI was drafting our own AI principles, our North Star for the company that basically set the overall goal for us and how we would go about deploying and using AI in the tools and services we build. And then as we talked about, we have a trust program where we operate and we assess privacy and security risks. But in the middle, we're all thinking about AI governance. We want to understand, how do we govern this new technology? How do we ensure it's used safely? How do we avoid some of the concerns that you read about in the media around hallucination and bias? And at the same time, how do we have a conversation about this in a very structured way so that we're not kind of getting worked up about risks that aren't important, and we focus on what is important? And likewise, our customers are going to want to know, and our users are asking, tell us, Dropbox, how are you using my data? How are you actually protecting my privacy? And how can I trust that I can give my data to you when you're using these type of tools? And so any sort of tool or framework that helps us have a kind of a more structured approach to this, that allows us to see where the risks really are, to allow us to communicate those in a way that the board can understand, regulators can understand, and we can use to prioritize. And more importantly, is repeatable, so year on year we can assess progress. Well, that is something that I would always welcome as a DPO. And whether it's in this area or other areas, I always look to try and build more structured processes, because that allows us to assess our progress, be more repeatable, and have more informed conversations. So whether you guys develop it or it's developed elsewhere, I think it's something we would certainly give serious consideration to.
Thank you very much, Mark, for taking the time today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and this has been a highly insightful discussion. And to our audience, if you want to learn more about the EU Cloud CoC, don't hesitate to check our website, our social media channels. And if you have any questions, reach out to Scope Europe. We are the monitoring body and the secretariat of the code. So again, thank you very much for being here with us today, and look forward to see you in our next episode.